How are we doing? Okay, we're going to have to ramp up the energy a little bit this morning. Hopefully we'll be able to do that. I'm Brennan. I'm very pleased to be accompanied by Blyth and Selen, Turkay. We are about to engage in a session about exploration and discovery and learning using simulations, making games. And so our plan for today is to share 3 case studies of what this looks like in practice here, and then engage in more extended discussion and Q&A sessions. So that's the plan. So rather than do a lot of framing about the big ideas motivating this session, we thought in the spirit of discovery-based learning, we would dive right into the case studies. Okay? That's our plan. Are we ready? Yes. Okay. With that, I will turn it over to Stephen.
Great. Good morning. Welcome. Thank you for inviting me to speak here. Also, thank you to HILT, because we got a Spark grant, so Nihal, who's going to be operating the machinery over there, and I were able to uncover what some of our students discovered using the simulation. A little bit of background and context. I teach in the statistics department. I teach a course called Stat 123. It's an upper level undergraduate course. This is where the simulation enters into the course. Students need calculus, they need probability, and we build an infrastructure of theory to tackle finance and the financial market. So there is a flavor of a practical element to the course, even though the mathematics can be, you can say, rather dry and theoretical. So there's this practical flavor. Anyway, and the original aim of the simulation, which I'm going to demonstrate here, was really to give flesh to some of the dry mathematics, to demonstrate some of the theory we developed in class in practice. That was the initial aim. As we'll see, I hope to demonstrate that the simulation actually led to much more than that, and led to students to discover and learn themselves about much more than we expected to be able to convey. A little word about the background and the platform you're going to see here. My former colleagues at Deutsche Bank were kind enough to lend us their futures trading platform, futures being a financial instrument. It is the real system that we use at the endowment, that Deutsche used, that all their customers use. So this was really connecting to financial exchanges. The first question I naturally had was, I'm going to let 100 motivated, smart Harvard students loose on this system. Promise me nothing can go wrong. And they said, we promise you nothing can go wrong. So we let loose 130 students actually 2 years ago. And a couple of weeks later, at 6 in the morning, I got a panic phone call from London Deutsche Bank. Steve, we have a problem. And one of the students had got around the safety mechanism and had bought an oil contract for real. So they had, we're probably going to do shortly. We might actually sell one. I was probably going to sell one in the current environment. But anyway, he had actually bought an oil contract, so I had this vision of 1,000 barrels of crude oil being delivered up the Charles. So anyway, one of the lessons is that you let loose Harvard students, lots of things can go wrong and have a lot of fun. So actually, we actually then had to migrate to a different system, which is Xtrader, which Nihal will just bring up onto the screen. As I mentioned, this simulation was designed to make mathematical formulas made flesh, essentially. A futures contract is a mathematical formula, actually fairly easy for the students in my class to embrace theoretically, but in practice, what does it mean? We were trying to get some light. So that was the first aim. We discovered 2 other things from the simulation each year we ran. Second was that there were group dynamics that revealed themselves when we just looked at the behavior of the whole class, that individually the students would not have realized. Psychological biases. We were able to feed back to the students. And the third thing was that individually, the students, as they went through the simulation, discovered things about themselves, about trading, about their emotional reaction, about their view about the difficulty of the material, about their sense of, wow, how does this work, how do we get started, etc. So there was a self-learning with the third one. And we're going to try and compress and distill some of that right now. So what we're going to do, this is the live market for, up here we have S&P futures. It's the broad US stock market. Just that top line there, 1986.75. The S&P is trading at 1986.75 as the future. Let's buy some. Okay, so let's put in an order of 100. So we're going to try and buy just 100. So we've got 100, 1987. We're going to try it. Let's buy it now. Okay. we're now owning S&P. We're buying 100 S&P contracts. Actually means we've bought $100 million of stocks. To Melissa's point, let's hope we make some money. So we actually managed to buy that without too much hesitation. In fact, in practice, pressing that button is really, really hard for students. As we asked them afterwards, did you find the most difficult thing is actually pressing the button and committing to take the risk. Because once you've taken the risk, let's have a look at our P&L. Can we go to our... that number, we've already lost $2,500. What are you doing? Stop, we've got to get out. No, hold a sec. If we get out of this trade, if we unwind this trade, we've locked in our losses. Right? We should run this, right? We should run it. We don't want to lock in 20. Oh my God, 37. Oh no, 25. Oh, we're at 2,500. All right, so here's one thing that people discovered about, or we discovered as a group. It's a well-known psychological bias. People will run losses but lock in gains. And we actually analyzed the data. No, because we didn't explain this beforehand. And we looked at people's trading. We have very detailed data. And when they were losing a position, they let it run. When they would make a bit of money, they close out the position to lock it in. It's called a disposition effect. Here we're $6,000. All right, okay, let's panic. It's just sell. Okay, so let's sell. Let's go to sell. Let's put 100. Where is it? Oh, it's 96. Going down. 1986. So come on, sell. Come on, sell. $5,000 lost already. So it's not that easy to make this money. So, all right, let's do some oil. Let's do some oil. Okay, so let's bring up the oil contract. There's this is light, sweet Texas crude, trading at $93.69 a barrel. Embedded beneath this, as you can probably see, this indicates lots of numbers. What are these contracts? Okay, beneath this, what's the size? What are we actually trading here? We bought some stocks, we lost some money, we sold them. Here is oil. What's interesting is that the mathematics of the futures contract is very straightforward. It's just an exponential function. But the actual reality of the product and this contract, you can see there's a lot of complication to it. What we did in the simulation, we had very skeletal instruction about how to use this platform. And so the students came into this thinking, okay, this future, oh, that's straightforward. It's actually SE to the RT. I understand everything about futures. Okay, here is your trading platform. Go ahead. And we had lots of people say, I don't know where to start. What is it? Where's the answer? Where is it in the lectures that tells me what to do here? Of course, that's the point. Just find out. Go and try. Okay, so let's go and sell some, let's sell 100 oil contracts. Let's sell it at 93.72. Let's do 100 of those. We've actually now sold 100,000 barrels, because each contract is actually 1,000 barrels. So there's some technology, some knowledge that people discover about the underlying market from trading. Okay, so there are three elements that we've sort of distilled out of this simulation. The first one is skeletal instruction, right? Skeletal list of how to trade. Not too much information. Meant that students really had to work hard to fully understand what they were doing. Sort of self-evident. They actually had to understand what contract was, rather than just, that's trivial. It's a trivial mathematics thing. You actually had to work hard. The second thing that we distilled out of the simulation was the undirected nature led to surprising self-discovery. Okay, so we just let them run with this. And we had a lot of feedback saying, I wasn't sure what I should be doing. I froze when I started trading. When I started trading, I felt awful when I lost money. When I started making money, I felt awesome. When I traded, I obsessed about the P&L. That number here. Right? We didn't say, look, you're going to be really obsessive about it when you trade. Just like, here it is. And so that was this undirected self-discovery. There were lots of other things we discovered when we analyzed the data and we kind of fed back to the class. For instance, fascinating, we told people you cannot trade more than 200 contracts each time. So 200 of these futures contracts each time. But you can trade a total of 800 of a particular contract. Okay, so naturally you could just buy 200 4 times to get to 800. And if the aim, which was the aim to make as much money as possible, you should take as big a position as possible. But there was sort of an anchoring effect that with this limit of 200, in fact what we discovered, people traded in lots of 100 or 50. So there was a sort of personal haircutting of risk. Oh, the limit is 200. I better not go to that, so I'm going to do 100 instead. It's incredible. The histogram is incredibly pronounced on that. We had the disposition effect, as I mentioned. The other thing was what's known as long bias, right? Where on these futures, you could say, hey, I just sold oil here. Hey, you didn't have the oil to begin with. It doesn't matter. This is actually the nature of this derivative contract. You can buy it or sell it regardless, even if you don't have it. It's entirely symmetric. But if you looked at what happened to the students, they all bought first. All of them. Everyone bought something before they sold something, even though we'd said, oh, actually it's symmetric. You can just sell oil. You can just sell them. Still losing money on that as well, aren't we? No, that's $15,000, $16,000, $17,000. It's not that easy. That's the other thing we said. It's not that easy. The third thing I think that's really important about the simulation, I hope, is that it is real. It is not contrived. This is what led to the engagement from the students. We sort of set it up, and there was a lot of ho-hum simulation. Yes, I just press a button. There's something online. I just do it. It's real. These are the real prices. It's not like I'm setting a sort of pre-arranged simulation where a week in something happens. Right? This is not a designed course or test where, a week in there's some terrorist attack. What do you do? Right? You should buy oil. It's not like that. It's not contrived. It's real. So we don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what's going to happen. The students don't know what's going to happen. I think that really helped with the engagement. The other thing that is, this is real. This is what traders use. This is what we use at the endowment to trade futures. So the real element, these are all obviously paper trades. And be rest assured we have not just parked $26,000. It's pretty amazing how quickly you can lose money on this stuff. It's actually really hard to lose money, right? I mean, it's like, if you intend to lose money, that's pretty hard to do. I intend to lose money. If it's easy to lose money, I just do the reverse. I can make money, right? So that's pretty hard to lose that amount of money. But this is a real platform, and so that engagement, the sense that this is not contrived, is quite palpable amongst the students. And as we collated the feedback, they said, I cannot imagine feeling that bad about losing paper money from the students. So anyway, that's the simulation. There's three things we got out of it. It did put flesh to the mathematics. That's sort of the first egg. There's a lot of sort of learning to be done here where the mathematics is triggered. The second is this undirected nature that led people down all these different routes that we were only able to discover ourselves as the teaching staff through this spark grant and actually doing a sort of reflection at the end. And the third was the real nature, meant that even the most cynical, dare I say, of the students said, oh yeah, that's actually something I can really feel. So that's the Stat 123 simulation. Thank you.
Okay, so for our second case study, I'm going to tell you about a course that I teach at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. The course is about designing for learning by creating. So how do we design learning environments that engage people in making, designing, producing, exploring? And so I thought instead of telling you about learning through exploring, learning through making, through discovery, I thought we could engage in activity with your game. So this is an activity that I do in the very first session of this class. And so I'm going to recruit Michelle and Brendan to distribute materials for this. So you're going to need a partner for this. So if you want to make a friend at your table, you're going to need a partner, and I'll tell you what we're doing. So with your partner, take a couple of minutes to build a duck.
Oh my God.
When you've built your duck, add your duck to the table at the front of the room. That's going to be our duck pond. So take a couple of minutes, build the duck with your partner. So all of our ducks are reporting to the duck pond. And they're looking absolutely beautiful. So the question I asked the students in the first class, and I'm going to ask you, is what does the experience of building a duck suggest in terms of design principles for learning environments. What was the experience like, and how can we carry those guiding principles? What happened?
I thought it was very nice to have so few pieces because it made it easy to start experimenting without feeling overwhelmed.
So playing with constraints in the design of the space, brilliant. Yeah, please.
So you're constrained, but I'd say you're even more constrained if you look at what other people are doing. So you're better off being in your own group or your own world rather than seeing what's going on at the other tables.
Okay, so the social role, the social nature of learning.
I would say it requires a lot of negotiation with your partner that you're working with and communication.
Everyone's still talking to their partner after this, and everybody's got differences. Other things, yeah.
There's a lot of ways to build a duck.
You got a lot more interaction among your students than you would get in lecture sessions.
Okay, so inviting participation.
But actually, people were voluntarily interacting, and the room was very raucous. You didn't say everybody start talking, right? That's what it did.
Naturally got noisy. Other things, yeah.
It was a common project, and so as opposed to most learning situations where it's very individualized and and it didn't feel like we were competing. It was as if there was some kind of commonality in what we were trying to achieve.
Shared experience.
I feel very attached to my duck.
It's always so heartbreaking. People are like, oh, I bring my duck home. That's never used.
I find it amazing how narrow-minded I was. I don't want to implicate my partner, but I think at least I thought that you had sort of exhausted the space of the ducks that possible. Look at the table.
The instructions were clear and simple. The materials were readily available and provided to us, and the result was obtainable and visualizable and holdable in a very short period of time.
The externalization factor, having materials to externalize your thinking about things. Anything? Go ahead.
There was no right or wrong, it was just the ability to just create.
Open-endedness.
The way you bring in your own vision of what a duck is. To the experiment, I automatically thought about my 2-year-old daughter and those rubber duckies. But everybody has to conjure up their own image of what's a duck.
And clearly there was a lot of diversity as people were approaching the table. Almost one of the first reactions, look at how different they all are. Yeah.
While there's a lot of diversity, it seems like the piece with the eyes was generally used for the eyes. And so, but I think there were some things that were heavily anchored in a lot of similarities amongst parts of the ducks.
I'm looking at the picture I took of it and counted there are 27 ducks up there, if I got them all. And as best I can tell, no 2 of them are identical.
Oh, wow.
Which is truly remarkable, only 6 pieces.
The power of Legos.
Okay, anything else? Any last thoughts? Yes, yes, please.
I thought it was interesting that I think our first move was to try and move away from an undefined notion of what everybody else might do. And we tried to move away from something that we didn't really know was going to be like, but we thought everybody else might do something.
So you were seeking out the unique duck.
Yeah, but without knowing what we were moving away from.
I knew you wanted it. Henry. I sort of ended up with a new appreciation for Picasso because my partner Googled a photo of the duck, and I just away from that.
External reference materials and visual terms. Okay. Anything else? Okay. So beautiful. I love this activity so much. Even with we counted 27 ducks. So we did this a couple of weeks ago with, we had 100 ducks and no 2 ducks were the same, which was amazing for the 6 pieces. Everyone had, people were like, did you give us the same materials? You had all the same 6 pieces. So the activity surfaces what I think are sort of the critical ingredients of a great learning experience. So you're engaging learners in developing an external representation. You're relating your artifact to what you know and what you care about. You have the opportunity to engage with others, sometimes problematically, sometimes productively, and then you have an opportunity to reflect and meaning making on the experience. Thank you for some doing remote slides. So just a sample sampling of some of the diversity can be seen on the table. And the word for this, which is what the course is about, next slide, thank you, is constructionism. So this is what T550 is all about, and engages learners in thinking about 4 attributes: making, personalizing, sharing, reflecting. So this is my sort of go-to checklist for designing learning environments, designing technologies. This is how to sort of best support learning in a variety of ways, particularly related to discovery approaches. You know, we know that the best learning experiences do not position the learner as passive in relation to what's known and what's being shared. And yet so much of what's designed, and I do a lot of work in the K-12 system, is the facilitator, the teacher, the instructor sort of lecturing to the learner. So I'm really fascinated by the ways in which it becomes more a relationship of like, the facilitator provides sort of input to the learner, who provides input back to the facilitator, who provides input back to the learner, and it's a bit more of an iterative, ongoing process. And so I just wanted to quickly share what that looks like, that iterative process looks like in T550. So before class, the facilitation team provides readings and activities. So we do a lot of, probably not shocking, we do a lot of making in T550. Participants maintain digital design journals where they're annotating, reflecting on, recording their experiences. That all serves as input to what happens during class. So the course is very co-designed. It's a participatory space with the students. So as much as the facilitation team designs activities, the participants themselves design the activities and discussions. And then the course is very documented. So there are a ton of photos, videos, we use Twitter a lot in the course. All of that then feeds into what happens after class, where the facilitation team meets. We review all of these different learning traces, the design journals, Twitter, Flickr, all of these artifacts that the students have made. And then we look for points where there might be confusion, or maybe students are, there's a lack of clarity around a particular concept. And so we try to make best use of the different learning spaces. So learners at home, all of us together in class, what can happen after in all these different settings. So again, this process of facilitator, learner. And with that, I will turn it over to the third case study. You're welcome to drop by T550 anytime, and feel free to
Wait. Oh, how many possible combinations of those 6?
I will leave that as an exercise.
Hello, everyone. My name is Selen Turkay. I'm one of the HILT research fellows. Unfortunately, I will take you away from the dots, take you away from the computer simulation to the woods of Harold Parker State Park, where humanitarian aid students spent 3 days in the woods, rain or shine, to overcome obstacles and solve problems related to crisis, man-made or nature-made in a simulation. So the simulation was co-led by Harvard Humanitarian Initiative and Feinstein International Center at Tufts. What I will do today is to talk about a little bit about the simulation, design principles behind the simulation as I observed it and our HILT research team observed it, and talk about the case study we conducted during the simulation in April this year. So, students who participated in the simulation were either enrolled in semester-long course, which was credit granting course, or 2-week intensive course, which was open to the public. As a result, 2/3 of the students were either from Harvard or Tufts, and rest of them were professionals in medical fields or military or humanitarian aid. So in the simulation, when students come to the simulation, they were placed in NGO teams, non-profit organizational teams, and they were also given a role to take the responsibility of a task related to humanitarian aid, for instance, medical services, or being responsible of shelter or water, etc. And they were also given a number and a color, which they wore these t-shirts during the simulation, which made it easier for volunteers and for the team members to identify the teams during the simulation, because the woods are big. And so, going forward, the simulation had very clear learning goals. Some of the main learning goals were test and apply decision-making skills, improve stress management skills, and to improve teamwork skills. In addition to those, the simulation led students through multiple exercises during the simulation to enhance their competencies in like security or team building or reporting or leadership. Those were given and selected competencies by faculty for the course. So the main way of teaching or having students practice those competencies in the simulation was to build them into scenarios and tie those scenarios together with a storyline. Okay? And students had to work together and put into what they have learned in the class to solve problems which were either well-structured or ill-structured related to humanitarian crisis. So about the storyline, it was a realistic story. There were two countries, Igunda and Orani. These were fictional countries in crisis in sub-Saharan Africa, and the Igundan militia were harassing people around the Lake Orani, raiding to local villages, taking their food and resources, and making the population really upset. And the Orani military were patrolling the Orani area to make sure the people were there secure. And there were a lot of conflict between the militia and the military, and people were really upset. So there has been this low-level crisis and conflict going on in the region for a while. On top of that, there was a natural disaster. There has been like a lot of rain, and it flooded, and especially it hit the Ugandan side really bad. So people were passing the border to Orani. So recently there has been thousands of refugees in Orani, and the world knew about it, and the NGOs, international NGOs, were coming to the region to help refugees. So students were some of these NGOs. Basically, the main role of the storyline is to create a flow for students and guide their experiences throughout the simulation from beginning to end. So, for instance, here students lined up 9 in the morning on Friday at the Orani International Airport and getting their bags searched and papers checked. So from minute one, they were put into the role that, okay, you are in a different country, so you have to take this seriously. Again, once they are in Orani, they went to the camp area and they built their tent and stayed there 2 nights. Rain or shine, of course that means that it rained, and it was my first camping too. It was miserable, which upped the tension a little bit more for students. So even though they were happy for the first night, okay, we are camping, but as they went through the storyline and things got a little more emotional and the weather got really bad, they were really, really stressed, and they were understanding what it may be like to go to different countries and help in humanitarian crisis. So in addition to going through all these exercises and activities, they had to file reports. So that was one of the skills that were put into the syllabus for the course and for the simulation. Students were gathering data from the villagers, which were played by the volunteers and very well choreographed. And they are filing situation reports. And the final delivery was to create a service delivery plan for refugees how to help them, and present it at the end of the day. So one of the pedagogical strategies was used in this simulation was guided discovery. And students' discoveries were facilitated by those activities. Again, those activities very well structured in the course, and they were around the learning goals. And for instance, here one of the activities was to help to go to one of the villages which were affected by the flood, and they had no drinking water. Mm-hmm. So students were given some materials like I don't know, a piece of cloth and some chemicals, and they had to come up with a solution how to purify the water for the villagers. So they had a bunch of ideas, and there was an expert person to give them feedback there. If they were doing something wrong, the expert would tell them, let's do it in a different way. So they were getting instant feedback. Again, another scenario was that one of the villagers got wounded by landmine, and students had to respond and make a decision how to treat this person. And again, the facilitators were there to provide feedback to students. Sometimes they failed. Students couldn't answer the question or solve the problem well. And these teaching moments really help students to sit back and think about, oh, what I could have done better, or how I can help how I can help people who were in the need in actual situations. So, and there were, for the key skills, there were multiple opportunities for students to practice those skills throughout the simulation. So if they get feedback in one of the scenarios, they could apply that feedback and do the briefing in the later scenarios. So going back to the learning goals, being able to respond effectively to a humanitarian crisis can be really stressful. And to do this effectively, it actually depends a lot how to manage the stress and how to handle the situation. So the designers of the simulation were really careful to put that into action, because those situations may not be replicated well in classroom environments. It may not be very realistic to try. So they put those scenarios, they designed the scenarios really well into the simulation and ambiguity to put students through those those feelings, basically. So one of the research questions we asked for the case study was related to stress management. Basically, how does the experience of stress and how participants responded to it affect their performances and learning outcomes? So among all these participants, we collected data from 86 of them. About half of them were students from the intensive class, and the others were from semester 1 class. One big difference between those classes were that students who took the intensive class were mostly coming from anywhere in the individuals taking the class, and most of them had somewhat experience with humanitarian aid. So we also collected data through pre-surveys, which we did them before the simulation, to ask them multiple questions related to their stress in their daily life, or their sense of control, or how they prioritize some skills related as they relate to humanitarian aid versus others. So we wanted to see whether they change after they go through this intensive simulation. And we also collected saliva for cortisol levels. It is a hormone related to stress. So we wanted to see whether student stress changes over the simulation. So we did it 3 times, baseline before the simulation, at the end of the first day, and at the end of the second day. And here, one of us, Gary, is having people spit in those little tubes. So from the surveys, what we found is that students found the simulation mildly stressful, especially the students who took the semester-long class who were less experienced than the others thought the simulation was stressful. Yay, because it was one of the goals to put them into stress. So when we look at the cortisol levels, those whose stress spiked relative to their baseline were the students whose team members rated them as the worst team member. So their performance basically related to their stress. So stress undermined their performance as a team member. So when we looked at the sense of power and how their sense of power in daily life, there was a significant relationship. Those who had high power in their daily life basically had low stress throughout the simulation. So one thing can be done in the future simulations related to this sense of power, since that is moderating the stress level of students, is to have students to practice exercises related to sense of control and enhance their sense of control. So, just want to end with saying the simulation was very engaging to students in many levels. It was behaviorally engaging because students were going and building shelter, doing things, solving problems. Again, cognitively engaging because they were coming up with solutions to well-structured problems, and effectively engaging, especially as they went through the simulation, they got more emotionally invested what is going on there, and got more empathetic to the situation. And these were made through various design principles. The simulation was very realistic. The simulation was very high stakes, and it was very immersive to students. So one question is that the simulation, even though it was very powerful and got students to care and commit to their roles, and was a powerful experience, it had limitations. It's not accessible anytime, anywhere, and it is costly. It is basically like a movie production. You needed to get volunteers, hire hundreds of people to be there and play the refugees very well orchestrated. And it is a result of over 10 years of experience and iterations. So how can we design somewhat powerful experiences for students and and have them commit and care about their learning with what we have. So I want to end there. And I also want to thank Stephanie Hayden, who is the director at Harvard Humanitarian Academy, and her team to let us be there at the Woods and participate and collect data. And here, Gary and Sam were actually playing militia. Militia's main role was to create chaos and interfere with students' very well-planned actions and actually create more stress during the simulation.
I hate interrupting lively conversations, but I thought we could spend the last 20 minutes just surfacing some of the conversations. Clearly there were lively conversations at the table, so just surfacing some of the conversations we had. We also wanted to give you a live update to what's been happening.
This is not good. Someone in this room sucks. Don't sell oil. It's like, it's gone up 70 cents. We've lost, oh my god, 70 cents. Oh, look at this. Panic. This is sort of stopping out, panic anyway.
He's this running in the background, effect on your blood pressure. Okay, so who would like to start by sharing out what was discussed at your table?
Don't worry, I covered you with a call.
Okay, we're going to start here.
Well, we were contrasting the different presentations, and we were remarking that this one, even though it's fake money, it seems quite real. You know, you can imagine yourself really in that situation. You can kind of feel what's going on. And the last one, because you know that nobody's actually dying and nobody's actually wounded, and that it's this completely contrived situation, it's valuable, but in a totally different way. We were trying to figure out what way, and then we were just a minute ago talking about what the goals are. And in that last simulation, if your goal was to know what it's like to be cold and to carry human beings around who are heavy and to, you know, have to make decisions that people's lives might depend on, then yeah, okay, that's pretty good. If it's to understand, you know, the role of an NGO in a humanitarian crisis, not so clear, you know, what the simulation is doing for you. This one, it's just so much more directly related to what's actually going on in the real world.
But it's also a simpler situation.
Right, it's just much easier to simulate because this isn't so unlike what people see in the real world. And so we were just trying to figure out whether if somebody does one of these things, no matter any of these, the ducks included, they're going to remember this forever because it's so out of the ordinary from what they normally do in class. And we were trying to figure out whether it really mattered that much how aligned it was with what the learning goals were, because they were certainly going to learn something.
Okay. Does anyone want to respond or build on either at that table or be on the back?
I just want to comment on this real simulation. One of the things that was bothersome to me is we don't know the basis of the simulation. And so in many cases, the output you get is dependent on the model. And so there are certain assumptions made in the model, presumably, about the future, because it's futures trading. So that wasn't clear, and I think that maybe the students have to go learn that, but in teaching, it's important for students to recognize I think that they should be asking that question, because when you get a number out, you're looking at a loss, but it's making assumptions about at least the future projection, I think, if I understand.
Yeah, no, actually, what's interesting is that there's no assumptions in here. This is actually just, in some sense, this is actually just the price of oil. So it's called a futures contract, but actually they will, so some of the material in the class is actually, one of the interesting things they learn is that even though it says future and it's for trading in the future, it's just actually linked to the price. So there's no assumptions or models underlying this. This is just the real market for prices.
But in this moment, not what will happen.
Yeah, it is at this moment, in fact. Yeah, and actually that's an interesting point, because that's actually one part of the theory that the students learn is that actually trading futures is actually just trading, essentially trading the actual price. And just to your point, I think what we found really interesting about this is, yes, it is fake money, and despite the fake money, we had all these responses from the students saying it's nerve-wracking. I've got all these beautiful quotes. It became too emotionally exhausting to agonize over every single trade, even though this is, oh my God, it's 82,000. But you can see that it became real for them, even with the the paper money. And I kind of worried beforehand there'd be this, it's just I just press buttons and so on. It doesn't really matter.
Yeah, just to add one last little thing, is we were also talking about that some people play video games and they do a lot of stuff on screens and they're sort of used to simulation in that kind of on-screen environment. And are people, are people more incredulous when they're sort of out in the real world and it's not really the real world? Like this sort of almost looks like what somebody trained teachers would see, whereas fake blood is the same.
It's basically being able to shift, like where you are standing and taking that role. If they can imagine that they are NGOs, they will act like NGOs. And that did not happen the first day. They were laughing, they were calling, each other by names, not like as medical expert, things like that. But as they got into the role and they were treated like NGOs, they started to act like one and take it more seriously. So it did not happen immediately, but over 3 days, I think it was designed that way on purpose, not as a one-day exercise, but 3-day long exercise. So, you want to take that?
Yeah, I think, so our table spent a lot of time talking about what were the learning goals for each of these 3 simulations, and whether the simulations and or the ways that the simulations were framed were the most effective approach to delivering that learning. And going back to the comment made over here that it almost doesn't matter what they were supposed to be learning, they learned something. My personal experience is that I talked to a lot of Harvard graduates who can tell you what cases they took or what simulations they experienced, but sometimes they can't name the learning goal from that simulation. That's highly problematic from my perspective.
So how do we address that? How do you get at that deeper learning?
That kind of is a couple of things that came up, and 2 main themes that we ended up discussing. One, what is, so you have
Can you hear it in the back?
Sorry, you have something like a simulation, whatever it is that you actually use, and then there's this opportunity for students to be able to make mistakes, apply what they learned, and iterate. But if you have something like a capstone for a refugee thing, I guess you're making the assumption that someday in the future they will apply what they learned to some other situation. But when you're thinking about, for instance, someone who's preparing for law school or someone who's preparing to be a doctor, should you be working in those iterative processes during practice? So for instance, should you give them enough theory to be able to go out and do something and then come back and, and what's the right way to do that? Should they be doing that in the real world? Should they be doing that in simulations? How often should they be doing it? So we don't really have answers. We were just thinking about how much students should be able to fail and how controlled that should or shouldn't be. And the second thing that's kind of tied to that I was curious about was about the amount of reflection that students should do after any of these things, because there may not be a right answer to that either, but definitely you want them to be thinking about what the goals are and what they learned, but you don't necessarily need them to be writing a paper or something every time they do something.
And I'd just like to pick up on some of the comments rather than maybe someone else here would say what we discussed specifically, but I'm in medicine and in full-time simulation medical education, and I think when it's we do very high fidelity scenarios from all levels, from what you said, I think it applies to all levels, could be undergraduate medical students up to senior residents, and even attendants. But this idea that, hey, it's fun, it's new, just throw them in there, they'll remember it, who cares what the goals are, that terrifies me because we see that all the time. And, faculty member contacts say, I just want to teach something in your simulation lab because I hear it's great fun. What are your objectives of this particular session? I don't know, maybe a bit of team working, maybe a bit of clinical stuff. It's chaotic. And what happens is they remember it, but these guys, certainly in medicine, they're used to it. Simulations are not that new, and they've all been exposed to it from an early level now, but they weren't 10 years ago. And the learners really notice if there isn't a specific goal. It's like, well, hey, that was interesting and it was kind of realistic, but what's your point? And it falls flat on its face. So I think that's really the realism. And it's really interesting to me that people would look at that screen and say, hey, that's more real to a learner because it's the real price compared to putting them in with a mannequin or a standardized patient or something. And I'm intrigued how you come across that, because how do you get rid of the fact that it may be the real price, but it's not real money. So you've always got that little gap between, it's still a simulation no matter what you do.
Well, we were really surprised how visceral people felt it. It was just experience, but it felt real to them. The emotions were real. And so the learning goals, sort of feel I was kind of lucky because my initial learning goal was, okay, teach what the future is and what the markets are, all the sort of mathematical detail on contract size and tick sizes and all that kind of stuff, which is pretty dull. And you can kind of read from the page. And then it morphed into learning of what does it feel like to trade, and how to discover that it's very hard to make money and all the experience that go with trading. That was turned into what people learned. So to write that goal, it actually became ex post clear what the goal of that simulation became, self-discovery about what trading is like. It's hard, and that has all these attributes to it. So.
There seems to be a tension between self-discovery, whether it's guided or open, where, for example, the stress management, if you want them to learn how to deal with stress management, but you haven't told them anything about what the skills are, they just have to do it from the bottom up. And learning goals, which are, in my view, it's not just learn about stress management, but learn some skill, some specific skill set of stress management. So how do you balance that you have not just learn about something, but learn something specific about it, and the whole bottom-up discovery experience? And then I'm looking at the forest.
The way they were approached in this particular simulation is to take each skill for itself and design an activity around it and try to fit it in the storyline. So it would feel part of the simulation, not something like out of the context to students, so they're not going, okay, I was going to help the refugees, so what is this here? So they were doing these activities as part of this storyline, but very specific. So one of the learning goals is to be able to purify water. So they were going there and they were purifying water, and they were getting feedback from the facilitators as well. So if they did something wrong or they didn't know exact process, they would learn from the facilitator. So that is how they handled it in the simulation. I think that is also the way usually is done in simulations. Take each learning goals and try to tie them together.
But actually embed some instruction within the simulation.
Right.
Whereas this has no, there's no skill. There's no skill learned from here in some sense. I mean, there's a contextual and experiential understanding of broader understanding of the financial market within which the material sits, and it gives a whole richness to that material. And you learn a whole sort of self-discovery about how it feels. But in terms of skill, what skill have I learned from this? It's an open question.
Yeah. And there are different approaches. In this, it's a discovery-based learning. There is no need for instruction. So students usually come up with the hypothesis and they try it until they get some sort of understanding, and they can get feedback from the instructor. But in other instructional strategies, like guided discovery, students are guided by the questions instructor asks them to guide their discovery, how to solve the problem, or guided by materials they are given, like the pieces. So there are different approaches, and they're all sort of like different range of simulations as well.
Oh,
who wants to go first? I will let you two decide.
Oh, the gentleman at the back.
So yeah, I really love the three simulations and how they compare and contrast. I think you can tell in the discussion that they're great. Sort of, they have a clear contrast and similarities. So the way that I'm trying to think about it is like, there are different kinds of learning goals. Some are like, they say this in the military, right? Know, do, and be, right? So those are like three kind of. Is the goal to like understand something different? Is a goal to actually be able to do something to accomplish a specific task, or is the goal like kind of identity formation? Right? I want to feel like a doctor, feel like a statistician, or feel like a futures trader, or someone who's a scholar about futures or something. So I think that these three simulations contrast interesting. I mean, I think Selen's is a particular example of like actually doing something and then trying to feel like you're trying to be a kind of person by the end of it, in a way that Karen is very clearly not trying to get us all to be professional duck makers of Lego. So, and it's interesting in your case, right? You're not necessarily, or maybe I don't want to speak on your behalf, but you're not necessarily trying to. make everyone interested in futures trading. You're trying to get them to sort of surface the principles that determine the price and to get understand these sort of ancillary sort of related theories. So I think it's useful to remember or try to think about what the goals are along those three dimensions. Where I don't think Selen is in the end, let's all take a test about the three principles we derive from this. It's really like, could they accomplish it and do they feel different as a result? Have they taken on the identity of an NGO worker more than they had previously?
Like, can you repeat those three dimensions again?
No, do, and be.
No, do.
So I was equally fascinated by the three simulations. And I have a question for all three of you. The piece in my experience that's under-designed in simulations is reflection. The after-the-fact debriefing. So could you talk a little bit about how you think about reflection and where to cement the learning goals and cement the lessons?
Yeah, that's a good point I mentioned before, and I think actually Neha and myself, when we had this grant to rethink about the simulation, it was providing reflection for us, which we realized that reflecting that back to the class and getting the class to both just realize what had happened and to think about it. There's space for what I call classroom intervention during the simulation. So even though I said it's very undirected, there are times this last semester when I taught where we would come in and say, oh, just so you know, look what's been happening. Everyone's been trading a 1 lot or a 50 lot. Why is that? So there was just a very sort of straightforward discussion in class. There wasn't any kind of goal of, okay, write up, but just that discussion to really reflect back some of the empirical findings. And then at the end of the semester, we had all students just say, okay, we want you to fill in a little questionnaire about what you discovered and felt about the course. We found that incredibly interesting, which is what has been reflected back here. And I think for the segment of the student body who really got engaged in the simulation, they found that interesting as well. So I think it's ad hoc, but it's sort of throughout the simulation where we were able to sort of just reveal things to them. It's very, very powerful.
Talk about reflection. The reflection, as I observed in the simulation, they were built as debriefing after the scenarios students go through these activities, they solve the problems. So sometimes the volunteers were told not to get out of the role, but sometimes they're like, okay, I want to really give you feedback. It's not always, but I really want to give you feedback because you did something horrible. You were not supposed to. So they usually get feedback if they did something horribly wrong. So reflection was built in that way, and reflection was built in as coming together once a day in group in those like specific roles that I mentioned, like the medical services or the team leaders. They were coming together with an expert who were country directors, and they were reflecting back what they experienced during the day, and the country directors or the experts were basically guiding them and what they did well, or how they can change it in the future if they encounter something similar. So that are the ways that I observed. So I don't know everything. I wasn't everywhere during the simulation, but I was a ghost for one of the teams, which felt a little weird in the beginning because they didn't understand why I was there. If you're wearing like red ribbon, you're a ghost, so they are not supposed to talk to you. So they got nervous why I was following them, but they so then I had to take a break and say, I'm harmless. I'm just following you and observing you. But yeah, those are the ways that I can tell what is simulation.
And for me, reflection is everything. As Andrew said, my goal is not to have you all leave imagining yourself as professional duck makers. It's thinking about it. So everything we do in 258, we do a lot of making, building, creating. There are things to think with, and it doesn't. You're not engaged in that reflective practice, and it just what does this mean? It doesn't mean anything. It becomes a metaphor. It becomes a signifier. It becomes something to play with. So I'm in total agreement, as Crew and my colleagues are as well, that that reflective work is what brings home the deeper meaning, drives home sort of the underlying learning goals, whether you're going top down or bottom up. You need to engage in that work in a very profound
much